Welcome to you all. My name is Wale Hudson Roberts, and I have the privilege and honor of moderating the online book launch tonight. Thank you for attending the launch of Black, British, and De-Church, the book written by Dr. Alicia. The event is being sponsored by Student Success Formula, so we're grateful, therefore, to Dr. Emma Lake. Thank you, Emma. I hope all of you will purchase the book. It is a stimulating and challenging read. And for information about the book, it can be purchased at a discounted rate. Do look at the chat where you will find the necessary information and details. The launch will also comprise of a Q&A. Can I encourage you to put questions in the chat, and let's hope many of your questions will be explored by the panel. So again, on behalf of the author of the book, welcome. Ahead of me putting some questions to Alicia about her book, allow me to say something about her work, which I have read. The fundamental questions explored by Alicia pivots around the why behind the numbers of Black people leaving mainstream churches and joining alternative Black Bible religions. In this well-researched and highly stimulating book, Alicia posits the inability of many churches to meaningfully respond to racism as one of the primary reasons behind this worrying trend. In response to this increasing challenge, Dr. Alicia provides insights to challenge and support evangelism, discipleship, and reconciliation in British churches. The volume features insights into how the phenomenon sits within theological and other academic discourse, as well as the tools for bridge building in the community, offering, therefore, opportunities for both internal reflection within churches as well as an outward focus on the needs and hopes of people searching for the truth of the gospel. Black, British, and De-Churched, in my opinion, and hopefully it will also be in your opinion too when you have finished reading the book, is an essential message for the mainstream church, not least in our current political climate. I therefore congratulate Alicia on a well-researched and thought-through book, which has bags of resonance and relevance for the church today. So, in order to understand the book a little more, it would be good to put a couple of questions to Alicia with regards to content of the book. So, my first question, Alicia, is simply, what made you write this book? What were some of the factors that compelled you to put pen to paper?
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Wale. Initially, I actually was training to be a dancer. That was what my teenage training was, and my undergraduate degree was in dance. Started auditioning. When I finished, realized I didn't care about it enough, and I felt a bit of conflict. So I tried to move into theology and see if I could merge dance with theology as kind of my research interest. But at the time I was doing that, I started Bible college and doing the masters. At the same time, my friends just started saying, at least I'm not sure about this religion. My brother showed me some videos, I've been reading some books, and I think this is like a white man's religion thing. I've got loads of questions. And when I asked my pastor about it, he doesn't give me good answers. And they started to experience being shunned at church. I grew up I would consider quite sheltered. So any problem I had was just to speak in tongues, sort that out, you know. A very, very kind of spiritual, very religious upbringing, Christian. And my initial response is, wow, this is a lie from the devil. What am I going to do to bring them back to church? This is an emergency because it wasn't just one friend, it was several. And they had really hard questions about things I had no idea about. Black cultures I didn't really know about. Although we're Black, our family's Black. My mum's Irish, my dad's Jamaican. I grew up in Brixton. Like the way we were set up as a family, it was quite colorblind, I guess. We were in a Signs and Wonders church, and everything was about spiritual experiences. And so I started to read. And as I was going through the same Bible college, this is all happening at the same time. I started to realize that I even felt like quite a different kind of Christian to my peers. The God they were talking about, I was just like, I don't know who this is. I don't know why they read the Bible in such a way. They really unpick it. They're very like critical about this holy book. Like, so I was starting to feel very different and very strange. And the concerns I had were not the concerns that they had. And so I was having my own rude awakening of I've grown up in this bubble, a cultural and a religious bubble, and I've stepped out into mainly European Bible college, and I'm different. And this is what my friends have been talking about. So the questions that they had started to become my questions because in my early 20s, I was a bit late to bloom in that sense, in terms of identity. I started to think about my own identity and I said, actually, dance and theology can wait. There's plenty of time to do that later. This seems a little bit more urgent because my knee-jerk reaction is to try to develop apologetic skills and to argue their way back into the kingdom. But actually, I needed to take a step back, do some self-reflection, ask the basic faith questions again, and then see if I can help with this challenge. And do research, try and figure out what's going on inside. And that's what prompted the research. That's why I took the approach I did with ethnography, asking questions and figuring out the people, because I didn't think it was appropriate for me to go headstrong in apologetics when I was actually wrestling with my own questions of identity as well.
Mm. And when you engage your research, what were some of the patterns that emerged?
So I mean, the patterns were they were quite simple. I guess there were three. The main thing is that people had questions about the Bible, where it came from, who wrote it, the history of Christianity, that when they brought to their church, they were basically rebuked for even asking such questions. They couldn't get the support, they couldn't get the answers, and the people couldn't figure out if the pastor just didn't know or wasn't interested or didn't think it was appropriate for Christians to ask such questions. And that was very, very frustrating.
Mm.
Because what I found when working with these people, I was very inspired by the people that I interviewed because I would never have had the boldness to ask the man of God in the church, questions that might seem critical of our faith. And they were just like, no, I've got questions I'm asking. But they were shunned, and so there was a breakdown in relationship there. They went somewhere else to find answers to the questions. The second thing was the silence on racism, things happening at the time, things that have happened in the past. The legacy of slavery was always something that came up because they felt that it had impacted what Christianity looks like today. And if they wanted to resist racism, resist the legacy of colonialism, then how could they be a part of the church
Mm.
that is steeped in that legacy? And I think thirdly, I come back to relationship again. When the relationship starts to break down, the churches seem to kind of let them go and be a bit like, thank God, the troublesome one has left the
Yeah,
church.
don't take up anything.
So there wasn't people didn't feel like they were being pursued in that sense. In the book, I use the image of the one lost sheep, and there didn't seem to be that
Mm.
going after them. And so there was always these questions of, are the churches equipped for it? Can they do it, or are they not interested? And
Mm.
do they just want to continue on whatever they think is important? Many times leaders would say to them, don't worry about that stuff. Focus on this instead. And so their questions were just never met. Their needs were never met. Their answers were, the interest wasn't met.
So my final question, that's really helpful, Alicia. Final question is, now that you've written the book, taking into consideration the climate today, which is sensitive, to say the least, what message would you want to communicate to the woman of God and to the man of God?
I think it is the message of my book. We have to pursue truth with boldness, but sensitivity. Not one of us has the monopoly on how the truth presents itself. The truth of God is pure and perfect, but as it transmits through us as broken, regular people, it's going to come out in all kinds of different ways. Our influences, our capacity, our knowledge, all impacts the way that we try to transmit the truth of God. And I think knowing that means that we have to engage truth, share truth, but with humility, so that we don't incite the anger and violence that we're seeing. Because the climate today, it is so touchy, and we've got this left-right dynamic, we've got the black, brown, white dynamic. There's so much going on. But what we're seeing on the streets is not humility, it's fear-driven hatred. And it inspires it on both sides. And I think that whilst people say they're looking for the truth, what is the truth about God, about the Bible, about the way the nation should be run, whose nation it belongs to? What does the kingdom of God look like? What's the deal behind racial justice? Why the wokeness? All these questions that put people on one side or the other. We have to pursue this dialogue with humility. Because even as I wrote the book, to try and solve a problem, I had to really recognize some of my own faults and flaws, some of the filters that may have been unhelpful or may skew, or even lack of experiences, the lack of capacity, things I'd never read or known about. That will also impact how I'm trying to problem solve. And so what's the scripture? A soft word turns away anger. Being slow to speak, quick to listen, slow to get angry. That's kind of the method behind the book. But we have to do it with humility, because this is not an overnight job.
That sentence, pursue truth with humility, is absolutely apt in our current climate. Thank you, Alicia. That was really, really helpful. Thank you so much. So we're now going to segue into a Black conscious Christian faith course that you have written. So I'll hand over to you to engage the presentation.
Why are large numbers of Black people leaving mainstream Christianity and Black Bible religions like Rastafari, the Nation of Islam, the Hebrew Israelites, and the Holy Kubdit Church? Black identity has long been beset by the legacies of enslavement and colonization. And research shows that a growing movement is happening in the margins, a search for spiritual answers that reflect a deeper Black consciousness.
Apologies, just give me a second. Having a glitch.
Why are large numbers of Black people leaving mainstream Christianity and joining Black Bible religions like Rastafari, the Nation of Islam, the Hebrew Israelites, and the Holy Kubdit Church? Black identity has long been beset by the legacies of enslavement and colonization, and research shows that a growing movement is happening in the margins, a search for spiritual answers that reflect a deeper Black consciousness. In this series, Black Consciousness and the Christian Faith, Dr. Elisa Louie explores the concepts of Black Bible religions, religious communities of African Caribbean descent that center their identity, beliefs, and religious practice on all or part of the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament scriptures. Following an introductory session which breaks down terms and provides a background to the research in this area, this series will consist of interviews with Dr. Louis tracing social issues that are prompting many to walk away from mainstream Christianity towards these movements, and a discussion about the Bible religions more generally. There are also 4 sessions which focus on each of the main Black Bible religions, asking 3 main questions about each one. Who are they? How do they read the Bible? And what does salvation look like? From the roots of Rastafari and the Nation of Islam to the Hebrew Israelites and the Holy Coptic Church, what questions are these religions responding to that mainstream Christianity may be failing to take seriously? Join Dr. Elisa Louis as we explore Black consciousness and the Christian faith.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alicia. Great. Is there anything else that you want to say about that course, Alicia? Is there anything that wasn't
Yes,
communicated
so the
there that
course
you'd
is
like to say?
free. If you go online, I'll put the link in the chat. The course is free. You can sign up, register, go through the course, go through it with the book. It's a great complement. It complements the book. And that's it. Get to it, send it to your pastors, send it to your family. You can do it in small groups, make a meal of it. And we hope that in the new year that we can run some in-person similar courses as well. So look out for that.
Excellent. So we're now going to have 3 presentations, one by Sho Carter, one by Jeronne Rudder, and one by Dr. Alicia. Now I'm going to ask Sho and Jeronne, followed by Alicia, just to quickly introduce themselves, to give us a small window into what they each do. So beginning with yourself, Sho, just a little snap bio about who you are and what you do.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Wale. My name is Sho Carter. I'm a husband and a father, and an avid reader, I guess, of theology. I'm currently serving in my local church as one of the preachers there. I'm also part of the life group as well, one of the co-life group leaders. In addition to that, I really do enjoy, I'm quite passionate about engaging with the millennials and Gen Z in particular around the area of apologetics and historical theology, and some languages as well. I do love languages, but that's pretty much what I do day in, day out.
And you're going to be looking at this subject matter through a apologetic lens.
Correct,
I understand,
yes.
a 10-minute presentation. Jeronne.
Thanks so much, Wale. Yeah, so my name's Jeronne Rudder. I am a theologian, pastor, I guess all around kind of Bible nerd, to be fair, just to describe myself. I serve in a local church as an associate pastor, and I also run a video Bible resource called Uhambo The Journey, which takes people through books of the Bible and themes of the Bible, being able to see the character of God through the pages of Scripture. And so, yeah, my life is revolved around reading about the Bible, studying the Bible, and everything else in between. And yeah, I'm just really passionate about bringing ancient truths to life and understanding how the context and the world of the Bible impacts the word that is the Bible. And realizing that actually life is supposed to be shaped by love and justice. So those kind of like biblical literacy and justice, that kind of intersection are the things that I'm super passionate about. And I'll be kind of sharing in my 10-minute presentation around the pastoral aspect in relation to this topic.
Brilliant. So Sho, apologetics, Jeronne, pastoral, and Alicia.
Hi, yep. So In the daytime, I am a mother and homemaker and homeschooler. And at night, my my Batman stuff is theology. I do some academic consulting, working with Christian organizations to develop resources, teach, do workshops, some writing, and just to help with equipping the church to deal and engage in racial justice, reparations, reconciliation. And my real passion, my true passion is the Black religions, but it's a growing field, a small field, or a field I have to grow myself. And so that's what we're trying to do. And I work alongside Wale very often with the Baptist Union. And yeah, I think that's what I do. What I'm going to be doing in my 10-minute talk is reading a part of the introduction and just looking at this topic from a teaching and learning perspective.
You missed out the Sam Sharp stuff.
Yes, I also, oh my gosh. Oh, I've got a long list of things that I do, but as I'm with Wale, I will say that I'm also part of the Sam Sharp project. We have an annual lecture. I'm going to be putting the flyer in the chat as well, just helping to continue to equip Black Christians and Black people in the UK and Black churches to engage the legacy of Sam Sharp, a Jamaican Baptist hero who fought for our freedom and was key in the emancipation of my ancestors in Jamaica. And so we ride on that legacy, we live on that legacy, we teach that legacy to inspire people to keep going, pursuing justice. So look out for the flyer. It's in October. That's Sam Sharp.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Shall we begin with you, then we move on to Jeronne, and then we'll end with Alicia. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you so much, everyone. Again, as I said earlier, my name is Sho. Great to be here. I'm honored. So I'm going to be talking about how to engage with the millennials and Gen Z, at least from what I've seen from an apologetic standpoint. And there were four things that I was going to touch on. And it was primarily, well, I've mentioned them now. So how do I approach this topic of engaging with the young people, the challenges that I faced? I'll be talking about the opportunities for growth that I think are possible in the wider church, and the particular areas of interest as well within Black Bible religion. So first of all, to answer the question how I approach the topic in my ministry and work, well, first of all, I do so, first of all, by just being very careful online. First of all, I address the objections online. The second method I also use is to ask and answer questions, primarily for the sake of getting to know the question behind the question and why people think the way they do, especially those that I know personally, who hold some sentiments as well towards some of the false notions that have gained momentum because, on the wheels of social media, for example. And ultimately, all of these things stem from my heart, which is really to help encourage deeper and critical engagement. And when I say critical, I mean really taking time to delve deep into understanding the world of the Bible, as opposed to looking at things from the 21st century Western mindset. So in my engagement with people who have not really wanted to engage with the Bible, let's say they are atheists, for example, they've deconstructed and they've completely left the faith, or rejected Jesus Christ and the Christian faith and teaching the doctrines, I'll still ask them certain questions such as, okay, would you be willing to at least engage in discussion concerning, the Bible? If I was to convince you that it's true, would you even believe it? If they say yes or no, depending on their response, that'll dictate, the flow of the conversation. Because at the end of the day, we want to clear the debris and really get to the jugular, get to the real heart of the reason why they left. So I'll start by quickly just giving an example of what kind of stirred this and how apologetics is necessary. Forgive me, actually, I didn't even speak about apologetics and the definition first. I'll just quickly mention that for me, the way I've always understood it is that apologetics comes from the words, for those who love Greek, apologia, which basically means to give a defense. So Peter does make a reference to this in First Peter chapter 3, verse 15, where he does speak about us giving a defense, or giving a defense for the reason or for the hope that we believe in. We also see this in Acts chapter 22, where Paul is speaking to his own people, and he's giving a defense for why he believes what he believes, and he gave his testimony there. We see many instances as well in the scriptures where people gave defense for what they believed, or they spoke and proclaimed the gospel message. In the book of Acts chapter 2, for instance, we see that with Peter on the day of Pentecost. We see that also in the book of Acts chapter 7, where Stephen gave a he gave a defense for what he believed and why he believed it, and he really almost came back with a polemic to those who were present before him before he was stoned to death. In the book of Acts chapter 17, we also see Paul Areopagus also speaking about the unknown God, again in as I've mentioned already, Acts chapter 22. So we see those instances there of apologetics. So, and even in the beginning of the church as well, like from there onwards out, you also see men, so should I call them church fathers, who were also called apologists, or they were given apologists because they gave they, how would I put it, they spoke out against the heresies that were roaming around in those days, and they were safeguarding the doctrine and the teachings that the apostles had given from Christ Jesus, to safeguard against the heresies in their day. So the reason why I went back to quickly just speak about apologetics is because I feel that for me, when I first encountered personal, like close friends of mine who were once on fire for the Lord, but then, similar to what Elisa said, started believing other views that were gaining momentum because of the internet. Things such as, believing that they're true people of Israel, ideas of going back to the law, and other ideologies around that, and hearing words like my people, not calling the name of God, Yahweh, or the Lord anymore, but Yahuwah and Yahusha, etc. All of these things, these are some concerns I had, not just because of the names and the vocabulary that they were using, but just certain mannerisms. I was beginning to get concerned. And at the time when I first engaged in this sort of discussion back in 2016, I was a bit worried, and I didn't really have all of the responses that I would have liked that I have now, for example. And this was good because then it challenged me to go back and go even deeper into my Bible study. And this is something that is quite remarkable, because in the early church, they were well equipped and well versed with the scriptures. They were able not only to just convey truths from the scriptures, but they were also able to contend with the contemporary issues that were going on in their time. And that's something for us, I believe, as a church, that we must be willing to delve into, to be able to engage with people and answer the questions. And this is the challenges that I've found, especially in working with people or churches and resources. I'll start off by talking about the people. Some of the things that I have come across, for example, are views such as a result of maybe, to some degree, not all of them, not everyone has done this, but to some degree, maybe negligence of really answering the questions of those who have a skeptical mind, or those who are just seeking truth. As a result of the negligence from our part, what's happened is that they've succumbed, not succumbed, but they're vulnerable, and they've gone into to believe some of the ideologies, such as Christianity being a white man's religion. Christianity was enforced upon our ancestors, the transatlantic slave trade. They read Deuteronomy 28. They read that into Deuteronomy 28. And all of these other views, and primarily all of these things come from, I guess, because ultimately the human heart desires justice when they see how, our ancestors were treated, how they were taken from West Africa. All of these things here, I've seen these issues, and I think what I didn't have at the time, and I was challenged with, and I had to start reading. In fact, I've never bought so many books in my life. If not for apologetics. But what really challenged me there was that one must be willing to engage with these questions. and not to sit back and to either deem it that they've given into heresies, or to just say, let's, don't worry about those things. Let's just praise the Lord for how good he is. No, there are some times where we have to actually directly address the situations, address the questions that the people have asked. So I remember an example, when people ask the question, is Christianity a white man's religion? And even some efforts to make everything black in the Bible. I put an Instagram post out straight away just saying that our response to the whitewashing of Christianity should not be the blackwashing of it. Social media has become like the source of information, but what we also need to do is fact check everything else and ensure that we filter everything through the lens of the scriptures and the world that the Bible was in, the ancient Near East, and not through the things that we go through. As for the church, in the Black church, there is an initial a desire that I've seen to engage with the Bible critically and academically, to strengthen the church. But I do feel, I have felt at some time that we have to hold on, be consistent in that, and not let it dissipate, and be willing to continue to answer the difficult questions in order to help the next generation. Because our actions, irrespective of if we stand and defend or not, there are consequences, and it's going to make an impact on the next generation. So I would say, I would say for us, because I know time is probably gone, I would say let us engage in apologetics thoughtfully, carefully, and prayerfully, because it is spiritual warfare. Do not dismiss the questions that arise as a result of the questions or the things that's out there on social media, especially in this age. As Daniel 12:4 says, information will increase. As information has increased, there's going to be plenty of misinformation. But as the church, who is the ground and pillar of truth, we must be willing to engage in the discussion. And if we are unfamiliar, do not be afraid of theology to help us organize our understanding of the scriptures, of the doctrine of man, the doctrine about God and who he is and his nature, etc. Let's be willing to embrace those and actually involve ourselves in those for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sho. And we need people like you to enable us to reflect and think both within the box and also outside of the box. And I think your presentation was particularly helpful in arguing the case for apologetics. Thank you very much. Jeronne, over to you.
Oh, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Share. Can everyone see that? Just give me a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, well, thank you so much for the opportunity to just share a few thoughts this evening around this amazing book. I think my methodological approach to the few thoughts and contribution that I've got tonight is going to be really mirroring the methodological approach of the book. Dr. Elisa, she shares her lived experience, and often her work kind of comes out of her lived experience. So that's going to be some of the thoughts that I'm going to have tonight, sharing from my lived experience. And I want to use kind of two idioms, as you can see on the screen. One of the elephant in the room and unplugging from the matrix. We understand that the elephant in the room idiom is about there's often something there that everybody can see, but nobody's talking about. And then the other thing around unplugging from the Matrix is I'm a bit of a film buff. So from the film The Matrix, the Matrix is this fake world that you're plugged into. And for you to unplug from it means to be in the real world. So I want to begin first by talking about the elephant in the room of my upbringing, which was my racialized existence in Britain. That was the elephant in the room. So what is the room? Well, the room is church. I am a church kid. Somebody asked me the other day, did you ever spend any time away from church? And I was like, yeah, 110%. The times I spent away from church is when we did church trips to go to Brighton, and the church mothers had the rice and peas and the chicken and the coleslaw and in the coolers. I mean, we need to bring back those days, okay? And so But I was a church kid, and in the room that was church, black majority church, the elephant in that room was my racialized experience and existence that never was spoken about. I didn't hear one sermon, I didn't hear one prayer point, nothing in relation to my racialized existence. And the thing is, I still had a passion for the Bible, I had a passion for theology. And so I went to Bible college at 18, and I went to a white mainstream evangelical Bible college. And I actually studied church history for 3 years. Church history was one of my favorite subjects. And we talked about Constantine, we talked about the early church, and we talked about Martin Luther. 3 years, that's what we spoke about. But I didn't talk about how Ethiopia had influenced Martin Luther's view on the Reformation. We didn't talk about how in the Council of Nicaea 325, how 100 years before that, some of the theological issues that in Nicaea they were struggling with, they had already talked about them in Ethiopia. And we definitely did not talk about Black presence in the Bible, and Africa and the way that Africa has shaped the Christian mind and some of the theological thoughts and doctrines that we hold near and dear today. We didn't talk about that. So once again, I was in a space where the elephant in the room, which was my racialized existence as a Black man in Britain, was not being spoken to. And I really plugged into the matrix that is white mainstream Christianity. That became my world. But I had a friend who was an agitator, and he would always ask me questions about what does the gospel have to say about racism? And I also was working as a youth worker where I was working with young people who were engaged with antisocial behavior, gang violence, and drugs, and also with the intersection of like institutional racism. So I'm asking these questions like, what does the gospel have to say about any of these things? And so I'm being forced to reckon and look at the elephant in the room that for majority of my life I had not spoken about or even had any guidance in. I think what was quite problematic about that is that I became a leader in my local church. I became a leader in the youth organization that I was working with. And so I was now beginning to facilitate rooms that the elephant in the room, which was the racialized oppression of Black people in Britain, was not being spoken about. So this is why it was so vital and problematic for me. And my friend, he kept agitating me, and a little bit like Dr. Elise, my kind of woke journey, or the way that I put it, unplugging from the matrix that is white mainstream evangelicalism, it happened late in my life. And I started reading. And I started reading books by Eric Mason, Woke Church. I started reading Thomas Oden, How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind and the Politics of Jesus. And I just started reading all of these books. And I was like, oh, I was reckoning with this elephant in the room. And I began to unplug from the matrix that was white mainstream Christianity. And it really found its kind of culmination when I did my master's in theology, and I wrestled with, in my dissertation, the question of can Black British Pentecostalism assist Black church millennials to respond to racism? So went from never talking about the elephant in the room to talking about the elephant in the room all of the time, and from really unplugging from the matrix. And I wanted to share that because this book that has been written, I said to Elise, I think 2 days ago, it was both transformative and therapeutic for me because it detailed my journey. It detailed my woke journey. It detailed my unplugging and being able to have these questions around what does it mean to be Black? What does it mean to be a Christian? And have I backed the wrong horse effectively? And so these all kind of really impacted my praxis as a local pastor. And so one of the things that I admire about my brothers and sisters in ADR religions is that they have a thirst for knowledge, and they have a discipline of self-learning. And this really shaped the way that I wanted to approach ministry. And so, for example, just two ways that I would say that this desire for knowledge and discipline of self-learning shaped my ministry is in the local church that I'm in. When we do Bible study, we emphasize exploration over explanation. We want to explore the Bible. We want to ask questions of the Bible. The answer is not always Jesus, even if the question is who made the dumplings. Like, come on, like we can't be so simplistic. And the Bible it's nuanced, it's complex. As Sho was talking about, we have to unpack the world of the Bible and the context for the content to really come alive. And not only is the Bible nuanced, but so is my life. And so, really getting people to explore. There is no question that you can't ask. There's no stupid question. There's no rabbit hole that we're not gonna go down. And I can see in the chat, there's a couple people from my church, so they know what I'm talking about. Um, but also in my preaching. I know it's small and I know it may be seen insignificant, but I put quotes in my preaching. I put the references to those quotes in my preaching, and I put a bibliography in my preaching. And each time I preach, I'll send out my notes to and slides to the church so that they can look at these books. And I do it for two reasons. One, so they can fact check me, but two, also so that they can go on their own self-learning journey. Because I understand that the way that education and lack of theological education has been weaponized to keep Black people docile, I don't want to be a gatekeeper of any of that knowledge. So that has really shaped the way that I kind of do ministry, which then I think I shared it at the beginning, really finds its culmination in the video Bible resource that I started 2 years ago, where my passion is helping people I don't want to teach people what the Bible says. I want to teach people how to read the Bible. I want to give them tools so that they can go on their own journey. Some of the, I think, challenges that I see to the work is the refusal to reckon with the elephant in the room, to reckon with the racialized oppression of Black people in Black majority churches. One of the things I highlighted in the research that I did from my dissertation was some of the Black church millennials found Black churches to be a safe place from the overtures of racism in wider society. But one of the limitations of Black majority churches that they highlighted is it didn't equip them in how to engage with the institutional nature of racism. And I can then see why I personally, I admire ADRs, because they address the elephant in the room and they seek to also construct an identity that isn't just fraught with racism and the experience of racism, but tries to go beyond that as well. And so I admire that about my brothers and sisters. Another challenge that I see also is actually in the conclusion, where it talks about building bridges. There is a distance between Black theological academia and the Black church. And I think in America, we see that there are many bridges. Jude Free Project, the AND campaign, some of the books that Dr. Eric Mason has written and Pastor Jerome Gay, these are all bridges. And I see that actually in a Black British context, there is some great giants that we are standing on the shoulders of, people like Dr. Robert Beckford and Dr. Anthony Reddy. And also I see even in the chat, Dr. Selena Stone, who is doing phenomenal work. And I see this book also being another bridge that helps people to come over from that Black church experience to the wealth and knowledge and greatness of the Black theological academia space, but more specifically, the Black British theological space as well. And this book, I believe, is one of the ways that we can address the elephant in the room and unplug from the matrix that is white mainstream evangelicalism. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeronne. Okay, so for my presentation, I'm going to read to you some of the book, the opening of the book, and just reflect on what this has to do with teaching and learning. So from a teaching and learning perspective. Okay. Some of you may have your book already. I'm getting pictures of people who have got their books, so you can read along with me if you want. The pursuit of justice for Black and brown peoples has been a mission for centuries. In recent years, however, these conversations and efforts have been brought to center stage with the help of social media, and its ability to connect people worldwide has been the mechanism through which recent successes and efforts towards anti-racism have been constructed. The birth of the Black Lives Matter movement is but one example of how a hashtag transformed into a movement, inspired changes to institutional policy amendments, and brought international attention to the policing of people of color in North America and in turn the UK, provoking the silent majority into participation in a global debate on racism. In the background of my research for this book is the ever-growing polarization between those on the left and those on the right. The research process has revealed to me that it is in fact unlikely that the majority of people are wholly committed to either side, but that these political and philosophical dichotomies undergird much of the unrest around social movements such as Black Lives Matter and the challenge it brings to the churches in Britain. Inspired as I am by its basic concepts and successful commitment to activism, which undeniably has brought racial discourse and social justice to the fore of society, I felt that what was lacking is a deeper consideration at the congregational level of its political and theological implication. In the British context, the Windrush scandal and Brexit have been reminders that although it appears the wider public's attitudes towards people of colour are shifting, on a systemic and social level, there is still a resistance to recognise the equal value of Black life, Black Britishness as British, and the significant contribution that Black and brown peoples have made to the building of British society. As well as the wider social implications, this has led some Black and brown people to look outside the church for their spiritual support. Alongside governments, policing institutions, and large corporations, Christian churches have not escaped the scathing criticism of social justice movements. Recognizing the discrimination and exclusion of Black and brown people as a legacy of European colonialism, many scholars and activists have charged European historical churches such as the Roman Catholic Church, the Church of England, and the Baptists with complicity and silence for decades. And now, with the open conversations, provocative audiovisual sound bites on Instagram or TikTok, accessible lectures and courses on mainstream online platforms, the everyday person can easily be equipped with the language and statistical data to join the conversation. Leaders and congregations alike have been challenged to engage with racial justice and injustice, often so heavily wrapped in other topical social-political discussions that it has caused severe divisions within the wider church body. This book explores how some Black British peoples are navigating the social, religious, and political paradigm of racial justice in the 21st century, with specific reference to the alternative Black Bible-reading religious groups that feature little in 21st century racial discourse, but have had significant presence in the past and continue to do so in the margins of the Black British Christian body. The Nation of Islam, Rastafari, the Black Hebrew Israelites, and the Holy Coptic Church are religious groups that have consistently appealed to Black churchgoers who find themselves in passive, ambivalent, or resistant spaces about the issue of racism. Although these religions are no longer topical and are arguably overshadowed by hashtag movements, Black celebrity activists, and growing Black progressive and humanist scholarship, I conducted research to better understand how these Afro-Asiatic diasporic religions, ADR, maintain influence within the Black British Christian community. To put this conversation in context where it was birthed, let me introduce myself. I am a church kid, every week, midweek, speaking in tongues, casting out demons from about 4 years old. The end times, that was my upbringing. Beginning in a Signs and Wonders Word of Faith type community, moving on to an independent Ghanaian Pentecostal church, and finally a local Black majority Baptist church, which is where I am now. I've always been in church and I've always felt deeply shaped by my religion. This is relevant for those reading this book, it's relevant for you guys today. Because as so many theologians keep saying, and sometimes still not really believing or writing as such, we all do theology contextually. How we view the world, our experiences, our imagination, and our social interactions all affect how and what we believe and how far we are willing to be influenced by other ideas. I've personally found my religious experiences to be both spiritually satisfying, emotionally and mentally grounding. But there are a few memories, I'm just going to share two, that I feel have led me to this research. The first is one of my earliest dreams from childhood, which featured me walking around, performing regular day-to-day activities, and in the background was this cut-out comic-style image of Jesus standing and watching. It was the typical image of a white man, long brown hair, a white tunic, and a red sash. When I asked my mother what it meant, she suggested it may mean that Jesus is always with you. But it is only in the recent years that I realized the significance of dreaming a white Jesus. I never attended churches with images of Jesus on the walls, yet white Jesus was the Jesus image in my subconscious. As a child, I'd often laugh at white European men with long hair, beards, and sandals trying to look like Jesus. Although I considered my initial church experience as colorblind, somewhere and somehow, coupled with the broader Euro-American cultural influences from television, here was evidence of a default to whiteness. God, in my imagination, was a white man. Interestingly, as I moved between churches, joined the gospel choir, danced with the Black hip hop Christian company, the color of Jesus never surfaced as a point for consideration. Each environment prioritized the spiritual aspects of God Christ over his humanity, his risenness, his kingliness, his holiness. The second memory is from my undergraduate studies, when I also worked as a teaching assistant. I managed to secure a workshop leader position with teenage girls on the brink of being expelled from school in South London, which was also my experience as a teen. I put together a short documentary-style learning resource featuring people in their 20s talking about what they would do differently, what they would change. And I invited my friends and family, mainly Christian, to feature. One of the contributors I'd previously known as a Christian rapper. And by the time of the filming, he had become what I would have said at the time, radicalized. He appeared to have undergone a personal religious transformation, no longer evangelizing the gospel as I had known him to. He was clutching a book while telling me about a conspiracy against Black people, apparent evidence that suggested AIDS and HIV were created to destroy Black people through viral genocide. Admittedly, I brushed off his accusations as nonsense. I developed a low tolerance for this type of conversation. As far as I was concerned at that time, slavery was 400 years ago and Black people needed to get over it. Upon reflection, I considered this an outcome of my colorblind Christian upbringing. Black identity, culture, and history had not featured overtly and intentionally in my religious upbringing. I understood the culture in my home to be spiritual and colorblind despite my Jamaican and Northern Irish roots. We did not have reggae in the house growing up like other Jamaican friends and family. We had some gospel music, which I failed to link to Blackness. Christian rock and CCM in the 90s seemed to be full of what I understood to be Orthodox Jewish references is what we had. And if we felt like something secular to spice it up, it was Whitney Houston and Kenny G, the saxophonist. We didn't discuss issues within the Black community or participate in justice initiatives or cultural activities such as Carnival. I therefore completely disregarded the encounter with this former Christian rapper. I considered him delusional and his views offensive. I put it to the back of my mind. If I ever spoke of this incident, it was only to mock the person I knew who had been radicalized by that Black stuff. A few years later, a conversation with close friends took an unexpected turn. A friend I prayed with went to church events with, whom I considered a sister in Christ, announced she was no longer into this Jesus stuff. I then went to Bible college, my formal theological studies at a London college, and I experienced significant disillusion with the church. God at college seemed different from the God I'd come to know growing up. And it had a startling implication about how I felt about my identity. And I also began to feel like Black charismatic and Pentecostal Christianity was the butt of every joke, the way we prayed, exercised, proof texts, gave into emotionalism, and took the Bible so literally. I could never understand the God my peers spoke about or connect with their interpretations. And so whenever I gathered the courage to contribute on behalf of my God, I was often met with silence or politely followed up with by, what I think she means is, Coupled with these other experiences in my sheltered life, the penny finally dropped. I was a Black Christian in a white Christian space that was both theologically and critically underdeveloped. That's part of my introduction to the book. And I've just got a couple of points because I'm aware of time. These are the experiences that shaped how I approached my research. I had to be humble because I had some groundwork to do myself. I had some attitudes that I'd grown up with that I needed to change. I had a lot of learning to do about myself, my family, and what Jesus and what the Bible means for Black Christians in Britain. Not only to chase them down and say, cast out demons of unbelief and doubt and all that, but actually, let's sit down and talk. I need to learn, but I've also got a spiritual conviction I'd like to share, and I'd like to shape it so that it makes it relevant for you. And so what I did, rather than write a big volume about why all these people are wrong and why everybody who speaks against Christianity was wrong, I engaged in conversation, recorded those conversations, and bring to you in this book how they feel, what they're looking for, the hopes and desires that exposes the gaps in the mainstream church. I was not only the teacher, yes, I did a bit of apologetics and teaching, but I was learning. I learned from these people. I had to take the teacher-learner role during my research to make sure that as we worked together in groups and small groups over years, I started this research in 2016, that we were working together to solve the issue. They were sharing their information about their religious perspectives with me. I was sharing with them. And I didn't take an authoritarian role because that's what I had been exposed to my whole life. Finally, I was in a room with people who knew how to ask questions. And it was through actually doing a PhD so late in life that I had to develop the skills to do so myself. Thank you. So next, I'm going to introduce Dr. David Muir for our final presentation before Q&A. Dr. David Muir is currently Director of Academic Quality and Standards at Christ the Redeemer College. Formerly, he was the head of Whitelands College, Senior Lecturer in Public Theology and Community Engagement. He's a political scientist and theologian. David began his career as a secondary school teacher in South London, where he taught religious education and history. He was a former head of research and regional development at the Commonwealth Institute and Home Office advisor on policing, diversity, and community relations. In 2000, he was appointed by the Home Secretary to the new Metropolitan Police Authority, where he was deputy chairman and chair of the MPA's first public inquiry, the Verdi inquiry. David was director of the Humanities Programme at London Metropolitan University and special advisor to the Vice-Chancellor's Office. At LMU, he taught ideology and conflict, Caribbean political economy, and post-war Black British history. He has taught history, theology, and politics at a number of UK universities and colleges, including Goldsmiths College, Simon of Cyrene Theological Institute, Canterbury Christ Church University, and the Centre for Black and White Christian Partnership. David was Executive Director of Public Theology and Public Policy of the UK Evangelical Alliance. And David currently convenes at the Pentecostal Network. He's also co-chair of the National Church Leaders Forum and co-author of the first Black Church Political Manifesto. David is an executive member of the Transatlantic Roundtable on Religion and Race and a member of the Middle East Contact Group of Churches together in Britain and Ireland. David is a frequent commentator in the media and the Christian press. Ultimately, we are bringing the heavyweight in, the elder that I look up to. He was instrumental in helping me to complete my studies. We thank you very much for that as well. And I'm just going to hand over to you. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Alicia. We've had a very, very rich evening. I want to do three things very, very quickly. Say something about my own journey. Secondly, about theological education. And then some message and some practical things. I was a Rastafarian and a musician. And in 1975, a young man called Winston Bygraves, who Wally knows well, Winston and I fell in love with Jesus, and we were prepared to give up everything. Sadly to say, my church also made it quite clear that I couldn't be a musician or a pop star and be in church. But we didn't care because as far as we were concerned, Jesus was everything. And that took me on a different road from music, Rastafarianism into church, and into education. I wanted to say that because I think that for me has been really important. In terms of theological education, and in a sense, I'm very proud of Alicia because I remember before I became head of Whitelands College in 2019, Alicia was one of the first speakers at my Pentecostal network talking about this same issue. I don't know if you recall that. And I'm so proud and pleased that the journey, 10 years later, you are here. I think that's a real testimony to God's faithfulness and to your perseverance. So congratulations and well done. The great theologian Paul Tillich once said that we are all theologians, and of course we are. We've all got views about God and the Bible. Yes, we've got views on sex and politics as well. But I think, theological education begins with the question, what the hell am I doing here? Does God really care about me? Those were the questions I had as a young guy growing up in South London when I saw my best friend being beaten up by a cop because he was just standing there. And when I experienced racism, or when I was told about my RE teacher, wonderful man called Mr. Jones, he said that Robert, and my name is Robert David Muir, and everyone who knew me back in those days know me as Robert, said that Robert was a very, very nice chap. And he used those words, but he was incapable of passing an O-level RE. And 10 years later, I see Mr. Jones. I'm head of department at an Anglican church school, teaching RE, and preparing lessons for Mr. Jones. That's not because I suddenly saw the light, because Jesus came into my life and actually changed it, gave me purpose, gave me meaning. I knew that Mr. Jones knew very, very little about me and my life, what an awful family I came from, domestic abuse, racism. School was my escape. But when I found Christ at 17, that changed everything. And in terms of theological education, in a very, very strange way, I discovered surreptitiously, almost accidentally, James Cone in 1981, when I was completing my undergraduate thesis on Friedrich Nietzsche and German philosophical thought. You think, my goodness, why are you doing that? Well, I guess I was obsessed with the idea. Nietzsche's thesis was that God was dead and somehow we had actually killed him. And that troubled me deeply because although people were talking about the death of God, I didn't go to the funeral. And I wanted to know when God had actually died. And I did my undergraduate dissertation on this chap. And it was as I was finishing my thesis on Nietzsche that I suddenly came across James Cone's book, Black Theology and Black Power, on the shelf. And as you do, you kind of just skim it. And what struck me, I thought to myself, had I known about this guy before, I would have done my dissertation on James Cone. But what struck me was page 1. And on page 1, James Cone said that many people may think that Black theology is nothing but the Antichrist. And he says, actually, in fact, Black theology is Christ's central message to 20th century America. That for me was like a bombshell because I'm thinking, my goodness, that almost changed my thinking about theology. Now, my first degree after Bible college was in politics and government. Because I went to Bible college, I was also interested in theological studies as well. And I trained as a school teacher, teaching religion and history. Wale, one of my young students in those days from Brighton, and he's still doing great things now. But what was fantastic about James Cone was that James Cone helped me to realize that as a Black person, I had nothing to be ashamed of, that God was equally concerned about Black history, Black culture, and Black politics, and that somehow the churches has actually got this thing wrong. And I want to say to people on this call who are maybe thinking about theological education, if you're going to speak to the current generation, you must listen to Paul Tillich. You must listen to James Cone. You must listen to Anthony Reddy. because all these theologians are saying that we must all understand that we have a moral responsibility to grab hold of the eternal truth of the gospel and actually reinterpret that for every new generation. And you cannot speak. I mean, at the University of Hampton, I taught Christian apologetics, public theology, ministerial formation. I would say to my pastors and to my students, you cannot engage in contemporary conversations in any meaningful way unless you have a theological qualification of some kind. In the Church of God in Christ, they talked about for you to be a minister, they would like you to have at least an MA. I wish that every minister, anyone who's engaged in Christian education, must at least have a BA of some sort. You know, these are the days, when I started my PhD, there were no supervisors that could supervise my thesis on Black theology in James Cone. But I had a fantastic supervisor, passed away quite recently, Dr. Peter Clark. And Peter made it quite clear to me that I had to become the expert. So I studied systematic theology and Black theology, but I was my own Black theology expert because there was no one there. Nowadays, of course, we've got so many other people, and I'm so pleased with the amount of Black PhDs that we've now got. We need more. And, you know, I'm hoping that these PhDs wouldn't just confine their knowledge to the academy, but they'd also share that knowledge in the church in a way that is meaningful. One of the things that I currently do, I'm a tutor at Cambridge for postgraduate students. That may sound excited, but what I'm really excited about is the education of my grandson, Josiah David, who was 12 years of age. Help him just to understand something about the Bible is Black identity. And Joss and I talk about epistemology. Yes, at 12. I can give him the best of my thinking, my knowledge, my experience, my method. I can tell Joss that, you know, Karl Barth, as great as we think he is, says that to really be in touch, you must have the Bible in one hand and the newspaper. But my grandson would say to me, yes, Granddad, but what newspaper? In other words, when you become a theologian, you must at least be able to critically reflect on the realities that we're doing. And for those of you who are engaged in theological education, you know that the subject benchmark for 2022 gives you the skills, the knowledge, the understanding and appreciation that you would expect of a theology graduate. God, I wish and I pray that we would have more people going into theological education because they want to help the church. And the final thing, theological formation is not just important, it is absolutely necessary for our age, our day, and our generation. And I don't care whether you're a Baptist, you're a Methodist, you're an Anglican, you're a Free Church, it doesn't really matter what you are. I would say this, that when you're a Black person doing theological education, you've almost got to relearn all the things that they've taught you in order for you to truly understand what it means to be theologically literate and Black. And I would want to see more Black scholars having a real appreciation of the cultural nuances, the political nuances. I'd like us to be confident enough, as my late great leader, Joel Edwards, used to say, confident enough to be able to present Christ credibly. Not that Christ is not credible, but our methodological approach, our epistemological approach to the Christian faith needs to be relevant. One of the great things about Alicia's book, and I've been through all those stages, became a Rastafarian because I wanted to find Black identity. And then I discovered at parties, you just stepped on someone's toes and they wanted to actually stab you. And I thought, where is the ethical dimension of that sort of stuff? But I also know, without a shadow of a doubt, that God is calling people to be prophets again. Not to go and tell people about becoming prosperous, but to tell people to understand that in Jesus Christ, are hid all the wisdom and knowledge that there is. And I'm telling my grandson, who I love, right, try to understand Colossians 2:8, where Paul says that that we must be aware, lest people lead you down the garden path with all these new philosophies, all these fads, because these traditions of men are ultimately bankrupt, because in Christ we have all the wisdom, all the knowledge, all the treasures. And don't be ashamed, don't be afraid. You may not have the answers, but I can guarantee you, brothers and sisters in Christ have been talking, thinking, wrestling with these things in generations and generation. The final thing I want to say is this, that we are now facing a real resurgence in racism. I mean, we know that. And of course, let us not be naive. Not everyone who actually parades the British flag is an out-and-out fascist. And I often say to people, what is the difference between a proto-racist, a crypto-racist, and a neo-racist? And it's not a trick question. They've all been touched and tinged by racism. And we have got to at least understand not only how that works, but how racism, like capitalism, reconstitutes itself. And we must be as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves so that we can operate in the public square. I want to end with someone that I love. I know Wale knows him and loves him. Selena here knows him and loves him. Jeronne knows him. I don't know how much. I want to mention Reverend Dr. Joel Edwards, CBE, of blessed memory, who passed away in 2021. I said when Joel died that he wasn't one of our best leaders. He was the best British leader that we've ever had. Why? Unlike a lot of our leaders who are full of themselves and their egos and their empires and their building, Joel Edwards was a kind of leader that made lame ducks believe that they could fly. Joel Edwards was a kind of leader who would clear the runway of the debris so that other people can take off. Alicia, I want your book to help other people to take off. I want your book to be able to inspire them to see themselves in it, but also see themselves overcoming some of the problems that you are wrestling with. Why? Because I still believe, in spite of the aggro, in spite of the racism, God is still challenging and calling us to be prophets. And you know the text well. When the 70 elders were called before the presence of the Lord, Joshua's assistants got very, very shirty because there were some people who didn't come to the prayer meeting, but they were still prophesying. And they expected Moses to get upset. And Moses said, and this will be my prayer, I wish to God that we were all prophets. What does that mean? Not just to speak truth to power, that's easy. But we've got to now learn to speak truth to pastors. That means adopting a different language, a different code, a different mode, a different epistemology, a much more humble one, because it's important that our pastors do the work of the kingdom so we don't lose another generation of young men and women who needs Jesus. And as Andre Crouch, I'm old enough, Andre Crouch was part of my conversion. When I gave up my music, all my church people were singing was Jim Reeves, who wasn't even a Christian. But Andre Crouch was able to tell Winston Bygraves and myself that Jesus is the answer for the world today. Brothers and sisters, I still believe that today, okay, nearly 40 odd years later. So Alicia, thank you very much. May you be blessed and may you be encouraged because God has got some great things for you. Amen.
David, thank you very much. That was particularly helpful. I've known David for a long time, and as he hinted at, he used to be my teacher. I know he looks younger than me, but he was literally my teacher. And part of the reason why I'm actually participating in theological practice today is primarily because of David. So this mentoring, this inspirational stuff does often work. And on a matter of theological education, if I can just give a plug for the Sam Sharp lecture, which is taking place on the 27th of October, and Dr. Selena is going to be our speaker. And again, she's going to be wrestling and grappling with the whole thing around the importance, necessity of theological education. We don't have a lot of time because your presentations have been particularly full and substantial. So we have, I think, around five to 7, 8 minutes left. So I'm going to put some questions to each, hopefully, of the speakers. And because of time constraints, I realize that your answers are going to have to be pretty short. So my first question is to Jeronne, and thank you for your really helpful presentation, Jeronne. That was insightful, illuminative, and helpful. But my question to you is simply this. What's the elephant in the room in church and society today?
That's a good question. I think Dr. David Muir, he really highlighted it, that I still think it is racism. I still think that that is the elephant in the room. I think obviously we are talking about it, and we have resources like we have today, but I still think in the mainstream, on the ground, I think people are just not talking about that, or outside of the walls of church, racism is spoken about, but coming into the space of church and saying, how do we theologically really respond to this? I'm still yet to hear a message about racism as a sin from the pulpit. And I grew up in Black majority church. So uh, yeah, I think that is a part of the elephant in the room still.
Yeah, that's sad, isn't it? Really sad. Sure, can I put a question to you with regards to the whole piece around apologetics? Um, what do you see as a subject matter or a discourse that the Christian church should seek to defend today?
I think there should, can you hear me clearly? Yep. I believe that the one of the things that I think is important is the Imago Dei, and I tie that to Black dignity, because one thing that I've noticed from all of our discussions is identity, where our identity, like our relevance, especially in the midst of the racism that's going on. But the underlying current, the underlying current to all of that is the Imago Dei, the image of God. That's where we get our dignity from. The fact that he said, let us create man in our image, that's representative language of us to express the Lord in our current surroundings, and to preach it from the pulpit there, and let that be a discussion that, first of all, our identity comes, is, yes, we are Black, but we are image bearers first. And that even in our own culture, there is beauty in it, not that we doubt it, but take full confidence in that, and also not to be distracted by the whitewashing of Christianity that we have seen, at least in the West here, and really delve into the history of Black contribution, or at least African contribution in the church history. I think that would be a wonderful discussion to have, and something to be, I guess, spoken about from the pulpit.
Yeah, we too are created in the image of God. Thank you, Sho. David, a question to you. You spoke a little bit about pastors. A message needs to be communicated to pastors. What would that message be, out of interest? Can't hear you.
Two things. I think maybe some pastors need to actually listen more, listen to what young people are actually saying. there's nothing more tragic than you answering questions young people are not asking. You go to Rochester, and a lot of the young guys there, 18 to 22, they used to go to church, and they're now locked up. Why is that? Because maybe between the ages of 16 to 17 or 15 to 17, when they didn't go into church, what were they doing? They never heard the gospel. So I think pastors may have to listen and don't make the epistemological mistake of answering questions people are not asking, right? And that means it's going to be different for every pastor. I now have come full circle. I go to a little New Testament church down the road with Pastor Bishop Wayne Perkins. I think he's actually listening to young people. He's getting young people to do what young people do. So I think, for goodness sake, listen. There's nothing too spiritual. Listen. And the second thing is, empower young people to be agents of transformation. Many of our young people are going off to university now. Bless them. Find out where they're going. And by the way, make sure you've got some money so that every other few months you can send them some money, because you don't know, these youngsters are struggling. I know from my own university, head of college, too many young people have got no one to help them when they go there. And I'm always surprised, Alicia, that when they finish their studies, they don't come back to our church. Keep in touch with them. Simple.
Yeah. I think that's really helpful, practical tips. Good advice. Thank you, David. Finally, to yourself, Alicia, the consensus today is clearly that you have written an excellent book. And interestingly, what David said with regards listening and praxis, both those two motives are very powerfully reflected in your thinking, your reflecting, and your resource. It's important that you have the final message. At least I think it is. What would you want to say to us about your book?
The first thing I'd like to say is that when you read the book, after you buy it reads like a manual. So as well as kind of exploring various religious topics, there's a lot in there about how I went about it. And I put that in there to help people rethink about how they're going to engage, how they're going to listen, different ways to listen, different ways to take on the information, journey with someone, learn with them. That's what I was doing, reading and teaching at the same time, listening and speaking, doing it together, and often saying, I don't actually know the answer to that question, but I'm going to come back to you. Book a time, make the time, and come back, learning together. And I think this is what we've been all saying today. That's a big part of it. Being involved, not coming from an authoritarian perspective, speaking, pursuing truth with humility. And I think actually my main message is that there is truth. There cannot be justice without truth. There is a truth, and we are all looking for it. And religions, what makes people religious is that they're seeking for that truth through the mystery of God, what it is. And we as Christians are articulating the truth of God in the best way that we can. But there are so many flaws, so much experiences, so much legacies, but we are petitioning for a particular truth that is revealed through Jesus Christ. And as we do that, as we pursue that truth, we have to, again, do it with humility. There cannot be justice without an absolute truth. But how we try to convey that truth is the tricky part. And that's where humility is needed.
Thank you, Alicia. Yoshi said, Amen. And whoever Yoshi is, he is absolutely right. So let me conclude by saying this, if I might. Alicia, often in your bios, you describe yourself as an emerging theologian, and you're not. You are a theologian that has emerged. You are a theologian in your own right. You are an authentic, genuine, real theologian. You do your research, you engage in scholarly stuff, you produce the resources, you teach us about God, and you enable your people and others to reflect on God. You are not emerging. So that you need to delete. And for your book, which as you know, I have read. It is a superb book, and it is very reflective of who you are. And I hope and pray that all of us involved in this space pick up that book and take it home and read it. Because not only does it comprise of good theological substance, but there's a lot of practical wisdom that churches need to buy into and engage with. So, Alicia, thank you. Thank you for taking the time out to think, to reflect, to obviously pray, and to finally write. This is not your first book, and it will not be your last. So despite the domestic challenges that you say you have, we are looking for other similar resources so that we can launch other books of yours again in the future. Thank you too for show. Thank you to where's my friend? Thank you, Jeronne, and thank you, David, my former teacher and still my teacher. And thank you very much, Student Success Formula, Dr. Emma Blake. It's been a great evening, really informative and helpful. Thank you. Alicia, have the last word.
Don't know what the last word should be. Thank you, Zip. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the contributors show. Dr. David, Jeronne, I appreciate your contributions. Also to SCM Press for publishing the book and being very patient. I like my thesis. This book was a maternity project, and there's a lot more maternity than projects. So thank you very much. Thank you for everyone coming out. Thank you for your evening. And also just to say for those who want to do this again in person, but with lunch, that's happening on Saturday. But yeah, email me, contact me for more information, but definitely buy the book. All right. God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Wale. Thanks. Bye.
See you, mate. You up already?
See you, Alicia.
See you Saturday.